Hi guys, welcome back to Crafty Quilting Designs. I hope you are well. Today we are going to continue with our Stash Buster series, and remember last week we started our Stash Buster series for series number 2, and this is a jelly roll. So last week we did our first bricks quilt, and so today we're moving on to a strip quilt, and this one is called a cozy strip quilt. So let's get right into it, and I shall take you through a little bit of discussion of what we did, how we're going to choose our fabrics today, as we didn't really talk much into. I just went straight into it. I was so excited to do a jelly roll. All right, now I'm going to take you through a little bit of discussion of choosing and using the colors in terms of matching up all of the fabrics in terms of the jelly rolls, because sometimes what we need to do today is separate lights from darks, and I wanted to make sure that you get that right, so that because sometimes when you lay the colors out, visually your eyes are telling you it's a light, but when we take a picture with the camera, it says a different story. So this is what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to do that for about 2-3 minutes, and then we will move on to making our beautiful jelly roll quilt. Okay, now pre-cuts are jelly roll, charm squares, 10-inch squares, layer cakes, whatever you want to call them. They are all pre-cuts, and all of the work has been done for you, it's been cut for you. The colors have been put together for you by the factory. So all you need to do really is to start sewing. All right, but still, us as quilters, we still find a way to cut into it and make it down in something smaller. So let's have a quick look. I've laid out some of the fabrics and some of the backing fabric that we could possibly use, or you could possibly use for your quilt for today's project. So let's have a quick look at that, and then we will go straight into our project. So today's jelly roll cozy quilt, we are going to be needing some strip sets. Now we need to decide on putting our strips together for lights and darks. Okay, now let me show you very briefly what I actually do. Now I have chosen to work with these jelly roll pre-cuts today, and these are white spots on solid colors. All right, now obviously you know that is a 42 pack with a fabric of 44 cut into 2.5 strips. All right, now if you don't have pre-cuts in terms of a jelly roll that you've bought from a company, you can also use yardage. Okay, as long as you've chosen all of your colors together, that's fine. Or if you want to do a scrappy quilt in terms of mixing any sort of leftover jelly rolls that you have, you're more than welcome to do that also, which makes it even a better quilt in my personal view, because I love scrappy quilts. Now to match up, or to put all of your fabrics colors together, you need to think about two things. You need to think about obviously the color, what your background fabric is going to be, and what scale the prints on your fabric is going to be. So for example, these ones here, these flowers, are smaller scale prints, whereas in this one here it's a large one, and this one here is a much larger one. So you need to consider things like that in terms of, will it go together? All right, so if I were to take this particular color, let me separate some, and match it to this one here, would it actually work? Now I don't think so, because first of all, it is not picking up any colors within this particular fabric here. All right, so this is just a standalone. All right, so you need to consider that. Now when you're choosing whether it's light or dark, that's another thing you need to consider, is what may look light visually on your eyes. When you take a phone, it does not look like a light. Now what I would advise you to do is to lay out your chosen strips of fabric for your project, and then take a picture. And especially if you know you've got to separate them, which we do have to separate them into lights and dark, choose your darks, choose your lights, take a picture, go into your phone and go to edit, and go to the option whereby you can see it in black and white, and it will show up whether or not your dark is actually dark and your lights are actually lights. Okay, so that's what I advise you. The first thing to do after selecting what colors you need to choose. All right, so for example, when it comes to the print themselves, if I were to use this small print here and I wanted to use something, let's go for this sort of burnt orange. I will go for that because I think the middle there will go very nicely with my burnt solid color. All right, so there's a little orange color there, and I think that will work really nicely. Again, and if I wanted to choose white as my background color, all of these will go very nicely together, so they blend. All right, as my mum used to say, does it all matchy match? Does it all work together? And these are the things you need to consider. So if you're choosing something darker, okay, again, white goes with most things. It goes with most things, but this is dark. I will consider this a dark fabric, even though it is not dark as in terms of looking at a black fabric. So if I were to put these two together, I will consider this dark on dark. I wouldn't consider this light on dark. So for example, if I were to change and I were to go to yellow and pink, as far as I'm concerned, that's light, that's dark. So for me, that will work really nicely. Okay, now let's look at the grey. Again, as a background fabric, it's not too dark, it's sort of middle range. So again, this will work really nicely. Okay, if I were to go with a bright pink, no, I don't particularly like those two together because I think this takes over. And to have something like that that is dominant within the layout of the quilt top, I think is going to be the first thing you notice. So I would have to tone this down and if I'm using white on it so that it blends really nicely. Okay, if I were to go back to this now and I said, you know what, I'm going to try this, I think it will be lost together because I wouldn't see it. Even if I were to use white as my background, I still think that the solid is going to be lost there. So that's something I will not put together. If I were to do these, as I said, together, they will go really nicely. All right. Even if I were to take a darker color, it will still go really nicely. But what I'll need to consider, does it actually pick up anything within that fabric, within that backing color, or within the print that I have here, that small print. Now let's look at a large or medium scale print and look at this one here and see what we can actually do with it. Okay, now would you consider this as a background? I'm possibly not. I may consider it as a border fabric, not as a background print, because I think it just might be a little bit too much. However, if it's a border fabric, then I can probably work with this color contrasting right next to it. All right, or even if I were to go back to a pink, let's look at this pink here, let's shred these apart here, that will go really nicely because there's a nice shade of peach, I think. This looks sort of pinky peachy color. I think those two will work really nicely, and again the scale of the print on the fabric I think will work because this is just small white dots on solid, whereas you have this particular larger print there to work with. All right, now if I were to look at something smaller, let's clear up a little bit because I've made a mess. Now with this particular one here, which is quite busy, there's a lot going on in this particular print. So again, something white strips will work. If I've decided, right, you know what, I want to use this particular fabric as my jelly rolls, I'm going to cut them into 2.5 strips and work with these. But then I think the best thing to do is to work with some white jelly roll strips or white solid strips to actually help me get that color contrast really well. Now if I also wanted to use some of these strips, what else can I go with? Okay, so I need to consider, will that actually work? Take a picture, lay them out together, you know, and see if it actually will work with you. So again, something like this I think is just a little bit too busy to match together with solids like this. I just think, and I say solids, I'm actually referring to the white spot on the solid color. All right, so you just need to really consider. The most important thing is that you actually take a picture so you know where you are. I mean, looking at this, again, it just doesn't go together. It's lost. It, you know, it doesn't really catch you. It doesn't make you, it doesn't stand out. It doesn't pull your eyes next to it. and that's what we're aiming for. Even if I were to go with something like this, again, it's just too bright, it just doesn't go. All right, so those are the things you need to consider when you're putting your fabrics together. Now, as I said, with black is a very strong dominant color, but again, as a background fabric, I think it will work. Also, as a border fabric or a sashing fabric will work beautifully with any of these colors because it's just so strong. Okay, and if I were to match them together in any sort of grades of shades of color, it will work. So it's up to you, but as I said numerous of times, is to do your best and take a particular camera picture, and then you would know exactly what works together for you. So these are the ways that I actually consider what fabrics I am going to work with to help me choose to get my quilt together. Now, in last week's quilt, what I actually did, and I'm just going to show it to you again, even though I know you saw it because it's absolutely beautiful. Now, the hot pink, that was not the jelly roll. I actually decided I wanted to use some yardage that I had and see what it works like, and it actually played out really nicely. So you can do that also. You do not have to use the whole 42 jelly roll to actually make your quilt. You can bring in some yardage, cut them down into 2.5 and work them into the layout of your quilt. Now, for example, looking at all of these different saturations of colors here in terms of the blue, so I had this shade, that shade, that shade, even on the binding was also different shades. And if you look at the backing fabric, it was also a different shade of blue also. So everything worked, everything blended. Everything was contrasting with each other. So these are the things you need to think about. So lay it out, lay the colors on top of each other of your backing fabric, and then you would know what works for you. So this looks really beautifully. As much as the hot pink stands out, it draws your attention to the quilt, even the darker shades here as well. So everything worked really nicely. And there were also, I'm not sure if you can see, but there were also small prints as well. And again, I didn't put any of the prints together. If you notice, I put it next to the solid so it can actually work. And in terms of the cream, because these are cream and these are white spot on white. So again, I laid it all out, all the fabrics together to see what it looked like. And then I made my decision to move forward before I start cutting. Okay, so we're going to go into the stages now of making our quilt. And I will show you what I have chosen for mine and what number of the jelly roll strips that we actually need, and we can get our quilt top made. It's a very quick, short, and I don't want to use the word easy, but simplified strip piece. And what we're going to do is start sort of, I don't want to say the word low level, but start with the ones that make sense to us, and then we will move on to more difficult strip piecing. So let's get into that right now because I'm really excited about this quilt, and we shall get started. So see you in a mo, guys. Okay guys, so I have chosen all of my pre-selected pre-cuts here. Now you have two options. You can make a 36 block or a 42. Now to do a 36 you would need 18 of the strips, and to do a bigger size you would need another addition of 6 strips added on. Okay, now so I'm going to go for the bigger size. The 36 squares will roughly give you a 60 by 60 sort of smallish throw size. They're very similar to the one we just made last week. So I'm going to go slightly bigger and add on another 6 squares onto mine. All right, so so total 42 I would have. Now I have taken my picture and I know what's lights and what's dark, so hopefully you can figure that out just simply by just looking at it on the camera. So these are going to be my lights. Okay, so these 3 are my lights, and the other 3 are my dark. So I've chosen this one and this one to be my dark. Okay, I'm going to lay this one in the middle. All right, and for my other one I'm going to lay the white in the middle. when I lay my strips out. Okay, so that's where I'm going to lay out. So what we're going to do now, so let me just give you, we're going to make a tube set. So we are going to stitch together our lights and darks. So I'm going to make, let me just move all of this to the side. So I'm going to lay that out there as the way I'm actually going to stitch it together. Very important you do that. So the way you lay it out is how your mind is going to pick it up. All right, now don't cut the selvage off at the moment, don't worry about that. We will do that when we start doing our cuts. So I am just going to stitch all these three together, and I will show you how I do that as well, because there's some important things you need to be mindful of. So at this stage we're going to stitch them, lay them all out so that you know where you're going and you don't get it confused, because it is quite easy to confuse yourself. So these are my darks here. So this is what the colors is going to look like. So we're going to make a tube set. So let's sew these three together and then sew these three together, and we will do that for the rest of my jelly rolls. Now I haven't chosen my last three as yet, but I'll choose that in because I want to see what all of this comes together first before I choose my last three. So then I will probably mix those up with a bit of light and dark so that it contrasts with the other rest of the fabric. So let's go over to the sewing machine. Again, 1/4 inch seams to get your sewing machine ready, get your bobbins all filled up. And that's another thing I usually do as well. I usually wind all my bobbins before I start sewing, so I don't have to stop during the sewing process and go fill bobbins up, because I absolutely hate doing it. I really know, I just don't know, but that's one of the process I just don't like doing. So to get it out of the way, I just usually spend probably 15 minutes or so and just wind up a lot of bobbins, especially once I've chosen my colors I know I'm going to use. So you can do that as well to make life a lot more easier for yourself. All we need to do is think about shortcuts that makes the sewing process and the quilting process a lot more easier. Okay, so let's go over to the sewing machine now and get that all sorted. Okay, so I have placed all of my strips here. Well, this is the first strip set I'm going to make anyway. So I've put the first three here in the way that I'm going to sew it together, just to make sure I do not get anything crossed up or mixed up. So I'm going to lay this out, front sides together. I'm just trying to make sure I have the front side of this white here, and I think that's it. So, and I want the white in the middle. So I'm going to leave that there for a minute. I'm going to lay it out, front sides together, selvage to selvage, just to make sure it's all lined up at the top there. And I've already put on my 1/4 inch foot there, and I'm just going to start sewing. Now one of the things we're going to do is to add on the other strip on the other end. So we're going to add the other strip on to the white end here. We're not going to add it on there once we're ready for this one. The reason for that is to prevent the strip set from bowing, okay, which can happen. It doesn't happen all the time, and it really happens when you're sewing a lot of strip sets together. So to avoid that happening, I just prefer to alternate it. I always think about the sort of the undoing process towards the end of it. So anyway I can save myself time of eliminating the process of having to unpick something, I do it at the beginning just to avoid that. All right, so that's what I would advise you to. So I'm just going to continue now sewing, and we're just going to zoom through this. Now I'm not actually pulling it through, I'm just helping it through the actual press of foot. Okay, I'm just making sure it's all lined up properly, and it's a 1/4 inch. Remember, keep that 1/4 inch consistent. My foot has a guide, so I don't really have that particular problem in making sure it's consistent. And the reason why I'm saying that is because our block needs to come out at a particular size. So if your 1/4 inch seam is not consistent, when we come to trimming up our blocks, and we're not going to trim it up to a particular size, we're going to trim it to make sure that all the sizes are consistent. So we're not going to trim down to make a size, we're just going to trim up. So if it's not consistent, then you're going to have different size blocks. So just make sure that whatever allowance you're using for your seam, that is consistent throughout. And I think that is the secret for most of the things that we do when it comes to quilting or just for sewing. Just keep it consistent, whatever size you actually use. Obviously, if you use a larger seam allowance, then obviously you know that your blocks are going to be very small. So keep your 1/4 inch consistent, okay? I'm just going to speed this up because it's taking forever, and yeah. Let's get it done quickly. This slow thing, I can't deal with it. Just too slow. Now, the fabric does not end together, meaning it does not end salvage to salvage. So that is not an issue. So as you can see, it is short there. All right, so don't worry about that. Now I'm going to flip it the other way. Okay, and I'm going to now get my other strip, and again front sides together. Okay, and I'm just going to add it on and just continue with that. So that is simply the process for stitching this together. Very quick quilt. I mean, I like making quick quilts. To be honest, what I tend to do, if I have to be honest, is well, I have to be honest, you know, no intentions of lying to you, but what I prefer to do is to make a long-winded quilt, what I call a long-winded, lots of piecing, and then after that I do something a little bit more simplistic. I think it just breaks it up a bit and takes away the pressure of, you know, getting the quilt done, you know, and you can do it a lot more in a just more relaxing effort, really. So I tend to do a difficult one and then, you know, go back to something simple, and I like doing it that way. It gives me a little bit of a fun process. So, you know, that's the way I like to do my quilting. So just continue stitching it all the way down, keeping that 1/4 inch seam, and notice I'm adjusting as I go. And I am not rushing this at all, in the sense that I'm not zooming it through or pulling it through or tugging on it, because I don't want to distort the shape of the fabric. It's the last thing I want to do. So I'm just taking my time really and putting it through the actual machine there. And just line it up as I go along and just continue. Let's speed it up just slightly more there, so that goes through a bit quickly. And again, don't pull, just keep it nice and straight. Let the seam guide do all the work for you. That is what it was intended for. That was the purpose of it. So you don't have to do anything other than guide that fabric through there. Okay, I'm going to clip that off. And that's your first strip set completed. That's number 1. So I'm going to do the darks now, and I am going to put it here as I originally did with the other one, and there it went. That there, put that in the middle, and this one here on the end. And I'm sure you can notice that my darks are similar shades, one darker in terms of the purple, and I just thought I'll try something different and see what it works out like. So I'm keeping the blue in the middle for obvious reasons, because I wouldn't want to do that and then have this one have the blue on the end. That wouldn't make sense, you know. So let's keep the blue in the middle. So just think about what you're doing. So especially when you bring it to the machine, so that when you start sewing, you don't make any mistakes. I literally hate unpicking. I really do. I think it's such a stealer of time, so I try my best to avoid having to do that. So I double check, you know, just to make sure that I don't have to do that process. And even though I double check, it still happens. So there you go. You know, such is life. We live and learn. Okay, so let's do this one now. Same applies. Let me just cut that off because it needs a feed, and I think I've started right towards the end there. Let's try and do that again. These things happen. There we go. So for those of you who don't know, a feeder is a bit of fabric that you put before you actually put your project in, so that it can take that up first and it can flow through. Because sometimes, as you've just noticed, when you put in the strip of fabric and it's right at the end, it traps it within the hole there. So just to avoid that, you can have a starter. But all I did was just come down just a touch so that it can have a little bit feed through already. And again, I'm just adjusting, making sure that 1/4 inch seam stays precise and consistent. And even though I don't have to feed that through, it gives me reassurance that it is, because I feel that if I just leave it, the feed dogs will just guide it into a different way. So I'm just helping that along. And again, just lining that up. And there goes one of my bobbins. There we go, almost to the end. And the same applies. I'm now going to turn it around at the other end, so this end here, and actually start the other bit. So just lay that flat. Put that down and turn this one, so the end where you finish is the end where you start. Okay, just remember that. Again, just to prevent that bowing, which can occur. And again, I'm just going to anchor that down so I can make sure I line this up before I start sewing. And I love anchoring it down because I know it's set there and it's not going to go anywhere. And I'm just going to raise it up because I think I have just put it right to the end again, and I have a consistent habit of doing that. So there you go. Right, I'm just going to do this now. Again, 1/4 inch seam applies, and I'm not pulling, I'm just gliding it through. Just gliding it through. And notice I am stopping and checking. I'm not, as I said, I'm not rushing this. I'm just literally taking my time. Now, what I wanted to say, you don't have to backstitch, so do not backstitch at the start of making up your strip set. It is not needed, because at the end of the day, all of this is going, that end is going to be cut off anyway. So that's a process that you don't need to do. You're just going to be wasting time. I wouldn't bother with that. Okay, I'm almost at the end. So once I've done this, we are going to go to the ironing board and iron this flat open. Okay, so those are our 2 strip set completed. So we're going to iron this now, and then I will show you what to do next. Right, so we're at the ironing board now, and we're going to set our seams as normal. I'm just gliding that down very quickly. I'm not putting any pressure on it, I'm literally just gliding it. I'm going to turn to the other side and do that also. Just flipping it back so it's flat, and that one as well. Now the important thing to note here is that when you are sewing, we've done that already. When you are ironing this, let's start from the back first so that we have our seams to watch. So we're going to iron these ones towards, and you can see already that with the actual fabric it's already sort of laying inward. So that's the way I'm going to do this one. All right, so I'm just going to pull the fabric very gently, and the reason why I'm doing that is to get rid of that seam. And I'll show you what I mean when I turn it over on the other side. Then pull the other side so that help it to lay nice and flat. Move that up. And there is steam on this. The iron is not excessively hot. It's on a low cotton heat. I'm just going to finish up this side first. Move that down and pull it yet again. I'm not tugging on it very hard. I'm just sort of stretching it out in the sense that I am helping it to lay flat. Alright, so I'm going to turn it over now. And what I mentioned, you know, the seam, because what happens sometimes is that the fabric can fold there, and I can already see that it has. So what I'm going to do is literally take sort of this area of my iron and pull the fabric back so that it lays really nice and flat. Now the reason for doing that is to make sure it's flat, but also you can lose, I know it's small quantities, but you can lose the amount of fabric there. You can, because it's folded over. So if I do that again, I'm contributing to the fact that my block size is going to be small, because I'm not being accurate in the sense that I'm not giving it its full potential and really opening it flat like that. Okay, so do that and really stretch it out. And I don't want you to stretch it. Don't go heavy-handed and really pull on it to distort it. You're just literally opening up those seams so that you can get it nice and flat. And I keep saying the word nice and flat. Okay, so just pull it back. Just slightly, because all I'm doing is just opening up the fabric so that I can get this front area to go into that seam there, so that I can get the full size of my block or my strips in this particular case. I'm going to do the other side now and pull it back again, and then once I've done that, then I'm going to go back again and actually iron the whole thing out, so that then I know it's nice and flat and I haven't distorted it in any way, shape or form. Now if you have distorted it, what you can do to get it back is to just simply sort of pull on the area where you know you have distorted it, yeah, so that you kind of straighten it out. All right, so I can feel already that there's no rigidness, there's no sort of bumpiness to go over the strips here. I can feel it flat already. So that's what I need you to do. And that is the first one done. So get that up. And then we're going to continue with the other one. So again, set your seams on both sides, because obviously it was 2 seams that we actually did. Okay, I'll just do the other side as well. So with this one we are then going to fold or allow the seams to lay the other direction. So the first set we allowed the seams to go inward, so this one we're going to allow it to go outward now, and if it doesn't want to, we are going to force it back. Alright, so I'm going to open it up now. I'm going to start from the back, and I'm going to go on this one and force it out. And notice I'm actually going down the middle there, so I can do that. I keep pulling out because my iron have a tendency of going right in the groove there. I'm just pulling it out so that I'm going right in the middle of the white, so I can wiggle it down and get the full length of it nice and flat. So that's it. Right, so this side now, and the same applies. just make sure it's flat. Now because we did it in the middle there, it's somewhat out already, but I'm just ensuring that it's out. I'm not taking any chances, and I can see some edges here fold as well. Right, that's it. I'm just giving you a little bit of steam as well, just to make sure it stays really flat, and to get rid of those seams there, in the sense where it creased over, and it's those creases that can take up some of our size of our blocks, so just be mindful of that. Okay, so these two strips have been ironed, and what we're going to do now is stitch them both together. Okay, so the next stage now is to lay these two together and make your tube set. So what I will just point out to you is that you can now decide which edges you want stacking together, because what that will mean is that once you lay it out and you stitch them and you cut, then those are the layers. So you're going to have sort of rows with the colors, so you can decide which way round you want. So if you want this one on that one, then you swap it around. So I've decided that I want this light purple on top of my yellow, so once I cut it into the desired amount of blocks, then it will lay to the way my mind preconceives the way I want it to be. So the same applies, so it's right sides together, and we're going to sew a long stitch on this side, take it out, and then go to the other way. All right, so let's do that now. I'm just lining it up together just to make sure, and the same applies. 1/4 inch seam, just making sure that's right in there, and we're going to do that stitch here again. Again, I'm just lining it up and taking my time till I get it all the way through correctly. Okay, let's go cut this open and see what the blocks look like. Okay, so now we're going to cut the strips down into blocks. So we need our ruler with that line running right straight through it from point to point. Okay, and of course you need your rotary cutter. Now what we're going to do is line up that middle line on our stitching line there. Okay, so obviously I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start from this side. If you're left-handed, it's very likely you would start from the other end. So I'm just going to line up my line there. Now if I go right to the end there, that is my salvage, so I do not want that. So I'm going to slide down. Okay, just move it down a little bit so that I'm not touching or cutting, or the salvage is not going to be in my particular block. And I'm just going to line up my line on my ruler with my stitch line, and making sure it is nice and straight all the way through. So that line is literally sitting on that stitch line there, and I'm just making sure it's literally on there. Okay, once it's done, I'm going to then cut it. All right, now this is now become scrap, but don't toss it away, because we can make something out of that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is literally just slide it down, and I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to line up this edge here to the edge of that freshly cut fabric, and I'm going to go back and line up the middle line within the ruler onto my stitch line, and I'm going to do the same thing now and cut this way. So again, cut. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move up, just going to slide up now and do the same thing. I'm going to bring this over. Doesn't matter if you move it, doesn't make a difference at all, because you're not using the mat, you're using the ruler to cut. So I'm going to slide up now, and again do the same thing, line up the point to that freshly cut point there, and again making sure that the middle line of the ruler is on that stitch line. I'm just lining it up there, make sure it's lined up all the way through, because I want it to be straight. So don't rush this part, just take your time, and again cut. That's my second one, and again the same applies. Slide all the way down, line it up again on that stitch line, edge to edge there, making sure it's nice and straight there, and it's nice and straight there as well. Okay, and cut yet again. That's it. I'm going to move this down, move it all the way down so that you can see what I'm actually doing. Right, so I've done this one now. I need to go back up here again, line it edge to edge there to get that nice accurate cut, line it up along there, and I'm going to do the same thing throughout, because all of my sizes needs to be consistent. Move that out of the way, slide it down yet again, find that nice straight angle there, line it up on the stitch line, making sure it's lined up there correctly, and we are going to cut. And I should get one more out of this. And again, I'm going to go up there, line it all up, make sure it's lovely and straight. And I'm going to cut. So now we have 2 pieces of scrap, and we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we should have 6 blocks altogether, and let's open it up, and this is what our block looks like. So obviously it's not trimmed as yet, so each block will look completely different in reference to how the colors form. So do all of that with your blocks, and then our next tutorial we shall move on to the next stage and how we need to lay these out and what variations we are going to do with it. So do not stitch them together as yet, because we are going to add a sashing in between these blocks. They're not going to be stitched together as they are, even though you can, if you decide that you want to not add a stashing, obviously that will make your quilt top not 60 by 60 and it will be smaller, but that's entirely down to you. So I will give you that option as to whether or not you want to do that or not. But these are our blocks, so get yourself all sorted and get your blocks to this stage, and then we can take it from there for our next tutorial. So if you enjoyed this video on making our cozy strip throw, please like and subscribe, share this video, and I'll see you again next time. So happy quilting, bye for now.